Alright, what is going on, people? Wanted to drop another one of these speaking videos. Let me get the camera all set up here nicely so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, there we go. Alright, what's going on, guys? Chilling here in the Maybach, about to go grab something to eat, grab some coffee. But I just wanted to drop this video because I've been noticing both in my live stream group and my free Discord, even in my mentorship, a lot of you guys are addicted to dopamine. And what do I mean by this, right? A lot of people think you get into a trade that you didn't want to get into, or you overtrade, or you can't stay patient, you can't sit still, you can't stick to your trading plan. And what's interesting about this is a lot of times the real cause of that isn't even money related. It's dopamine related. It's not your money that you're failing to manage. It's not your technical analysis that you're failing to manage. You are simply failing to manage your dopamine. And I've never really heard anybody else talk about this, but it's incredibly true, you guys. It's just like anything else, whether it's scrolling social media, smoking a cigarette, drinking, for some people it's alcohol, whatever it is that gives you that quick fix of dopamine, the human system becomes very addicted to that. It craves it, and the more dopamine hits you give it, the more it's going to crave it, and the more of a dopamine hit you need to get the same high. That's why drug addicts continue to use more and more and more just to feel normal. It's not even getting them high anymore, it's just making them feel normal. Same thing with coffee, guys. I am definitely addicted to coffee. If I want a cold turkey, I definitely can. But if I do not have my coffee, I will feel a significant difference in my dopamine system. And this is what you guys have to understand, because the way you train your dopamine to operate within the market is the same way that your dopamine is going to run you in your decision making within the market. And your brain does not differentiate between winning dopamine and losing dopamine. It simply craves the dopamine. It craves any spike that you're going to give it. So whether the emotion's good, whether the emotion's bad, you know, when you jump into a trade, you don't even know the outcome. So a lot of times dopamine comes from just doing something that spikes your emotion. When you enter a trade, of course, spikes your emotion. You have risk on the table. Money is out there in the ether, in the market. So obviously that's going to give your system some type of emotional spike, which is also spiking the dopamine in your brain. And this becomes a problem because now you can't sit still. Now you can't wait for the setup. Now you can't do anything aside from go into the market like a drug addict ready to get your fix. And it's amazing just how bad this can get. And in conditions where there's really not a lot of setups, or if a couple weeks go by and you don't see any really good opportunities, your dopamine system is probably screaming at you. And this is what causes traders to mess up. You're having dopamine withdrawal, so any dopamine besides sitting still is better than nothing. So the game of trading, guys, is really a game of dopamine management. You cannot let your dopamine go too high, and you cannot let your dopamine go too low. You cannot flood your brain with too much dopamine at one time, otherwise it's going to crave that same amount of dopamine every single time. So you have to be strategic about this. Another thing that I discovered along the way that many of my students are starting to discover now is that once you start getting payouts, once you start really going on some good winning streaks, this dopamine management becomes even more crucial. And the reason is, when you're winning, you are literally flooding your system with an incredible amount of dopamine. If you're making money that you were never used to making before, your brain is going to be flooded with all of this dopamine, all of this euphoria, and this can lead to overconfidence. And when you're overconfident in the market, of course, you're not going to do proper analysis, you're not going to manage your risk, you think you're the king of the market now, or the queen of the market now, so now you don't have to follow any rules. And it's not because you're undisciplined, because obviously you were disciplined enough to get to the payout, so you do have discipline. The problem is your brain experienced a high volume of dopamine, more than it was used to, for too long, too many times in a row. So now anything less than that, let's say you were winning $2,000 a day, now a $500 win that used to make you jump up and down when you were a beginner trader is now an absolute disgrace, and you can't bear to even sit on $500 profit without trying to reach 2,000. Why? Because your system got adjusted to a new level of dopamine way too fast, and now when you pull all the way back, there's that withdrawal, and your brain is craving that dopamine once again. So how exactly do you manage this? Well, the key to dopamine management, like I said, is to never let your dopamine go too high or too low. And the way you do this is you have to set up rules that allow for this. For example, I have a student right now who is currently on her 3rd or 4th payout, and she noticed that every time she gets a payout, the week following, she tends to be overconfident. She tends to take a few trades that were not planned directly after that payout hits, because what happens after a payout hits, guys? Dopamine spikes. So when your dopamine is spiked, you have to naturally let it come down back to baseline. So we implemented a rule for her that I also implemented for myself way back in my trading journey, which is directly after you get a payout, first thing you do is you immediately take the next day off. Take 24 hours where you don't look at a chart, where you don't take a trade, where you don't look at money at all. And what this is going to do is it's going to put some space between that dopamine spike and the next dopamine spike that you'll get in the market. Another thing we implemented is after she takes that payout, waits that day, for the remainder of that week, she is scaling down to half risk, and she's simply focusing on building the minimum qualifying days for her next payout. Now what this does is it gradually builds back the dopamine in a way that is not going to make you spike or crash. Because if you go into the market directly after a payout and get another huge win, your dopamine is now double spiked, and you're going to want to have activity all the time, all that week. Whereas if you put some space between it, you purposely scale down your risk and you let your dopamine reset over that week, after that you could go back to full size, get the next payout, and then the cycle continues. Same thing after passing evals, guys. You could do this after passing evals as well. If you find that directly after you pass an eval and you go into funded stage, you end up blowing up your accounts all the time, it's probably for this same reason. You got way too much dopamine from passing all those accounts, so now the very next day or even the same day, if you got the credentials, you're going in and trying to get more dopamine to match up what you got by passing the evals. So take a break, take a day break, scale down when you go into the funded, trade that way for a week, and then scale back up to your normal size. Now what if you're a beginner? What if you have no fundeds? What if you have no payouts? You haven't passed any evals? How do you manage your dopamine then? Well guys, simply do not trade every day. And when you do trade, do not take more than 2 trades a day, guys, because all you're doing is you're spiking your dopamine, you're seeing the colors and lights flash on the screen, and you're just training yourself to be a dopamine junkie. Even if you're trading every single day, guys, throughout the week, 5 days of being in the markets is going to spike your dopamine regardless. So maybe take a day in the middle of the week where you take a break, where you take 24 hours off to reset the dopamine so you could trade well for the rest of the week instead of being mentally exhausted or chasing the next dopamine hit. Maybe at the beginning of the week you don't trade the Monday, so that way you only have to trade 4 days for the week, and that automatically is going to reduce the dopamine and give you more time to reset your system in between each trade, so you'll be a lot less likely to go in for that purpose. So guys, discipline over dopamine. I say it all the time on my story, I say it all the time on this channel, but you really have to take this in, guys. It is a game of capital management, it is a game of mindset management, but it is more so a game of dopamine management, guys. And this system, this human body, this wiring we have around dopamine is incredibly fascinating, and it can flip itself on you if you let it. So guys, if you took something out of this video, if you learned something, let me know in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Other than that, take care everybody, God bless, and I will see you guys in the next video.